King of Podcasts proudly presents The Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Episode 124 of the Broadcasters Podcast is underway. I am the King of Podcasts. Tonight, I will be giving a special report. I want to go ahead and encompass a number of headlines that have made the news in the world of journalism in Silicon Valley that I think need to be pointed out, and I want to do something very comprehensive tonight, and this is going to be most of the focus of my program tonight. And the original plan to go ahead and run the second part of my interview with Kevin Goatee, I'm going to run the following week. I want to go ahead and push back on it because I want to go ahead and get this story while it is point of mind for everybody right now. It is very important. A lot of things going on as we go along tonight. What prompted me to go and do this show? First of all, the issues going on with the protests and further escalating riots going on in Minneapolis, Minnesota, following the murder. Okay, the murder at the hands of a very ignorant and reckless police officer in Minneapolis City that killed George Floyd. Killed him on site, onlookers there, regardless of the onlookers being there in front of him. What that officer, which I'm not going to name, is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to the highest degree. No human being should go through that. Now, there's a point of having to detain a subject, right? Regardless, and I'm reading the story about these people. These two people knew each other. They actually worked in the same place together because this officer off duty worked at a bar in the same place where this guy, George Floyd, worked at. They knew each other. They have a history with each other. As far as I know, I didn't know if there was any bad blood or not. But regardless, yes, George Floyd was being pulled over and was being detained for committing a crime. But that doesn't take anything by saying that his life should be taken. The way it was taken also gruesome in its own way. 8 minutes. If you cannot do something with that, if you have this person you're going to arrest, you're detaining him right there, even if he was resisting or not. You're telling me you couldn't put that person into the car, into the police car, with other assistants you had back up there on site. 3 other cops were right there with him. We see the videos from 3 different angles I saw. You're telling me you couldn't get that guy in the car for whatever reason, and at least just detain him until you got to what the hell was going on, the reason you brought this guy down, and handle it at the police station. This right here was mishandled and poor judgment. Not the fact that and this is on so many levels, from the officers that were negligent, all of them. One most negligent, the others accessories to the fact they did not stop this guy from stopping this detainment, which was cruel and unusual for 8 minutes, right? Cruel and unusual death for 8 minutes of this man, who, from all I'm reading about, was somebody that might have had some of a record and was reforming himself, trying to make himself a better person. The cop, also with his own record of miscreants and misguided attempts of policing and law enforcement. Also, many complaints on his record. These two might have had their flaws, but that doesn't mean the cop needed to be a murderer, and we did not need to see George Floyd become a victim. And really, the outrage then spreads across, because then there's stubbornness, ignorance, and just complete taking advantage of the situation that's going on right now. Because then when you see what's going on with all of the city officials, the mayor of Minneapolis, who is a scumbag and is a piece of shit among everything else, the police chief not doing a better job of handling the situation, to congressional officials, to everybody else. There's a lot of people here that are just doing real bullshit right now, doing a hack-up job. And then the citizens, there are those that are properly, peacefully protesting. But meanwhile, while there are some of those now, we see the ones that are going to take advantage of the situation. They see, here we go, black on white crime, white on black crime, right? You're going to see that. The media now, in the second day of riots in Minneapolis, we're seeing fires, we're seeing looting, we're seeing cars on fire, low-income housing put ablaze, chain businesses like AutoZone, Wendy's, and whatnot, and McDonald's I just saw also in flames, destroying their own city, which I wouldn't be surprised if there are some that have been brought in that are, like anarchist type groups that are being brought in that are coming in to escalate the situation and make it worse. And not only them, and this is what gets to my point of tonight's program, the media is also complicit. All of a sudden, all the media is converging right now into Minneapolis to cover the streets. None of them give a shit about what's going on with the case. I don't hear anything about the case except for the fact that police officers got fired. I hear nothing about the investigation, nothing more into the background. I hear so little about background about these two people that were in this situation. The two people that were part of the situation, the guilty and the innocent. The person that killed a man and the person that was killed. The man that was killed. You have the racial undertones going on. Then you have the pandemic that also, and the lockdowns that are going on as well, that are not helping things at all. This is chaos among everything else. And now, everybody else, in the political sense, I don't give a shit, okay? The political part, I don't care about. I'm not on any side. I am on the fence, okay? I am independent in my political thinking. So I don't care about any of that. This was wrong. The racial component, there's going to be points where that is, I understand the argument. Do we have to say that this argument also plays into it? It just helps. Because, I don't ever see anything where we see that, we're going to have so much of an issue with, that we have all this racial uprising. I think it's escalated. I don't think it's as bad as people say it is. I really don't, and I'm a minority. But that's my point. That's all I'm going to say about that to that extent. But the people that are at fault are the government officials, which, of course, government, for the most part, in my opinion, they're useless in so many different ways. All of government. I mean, all of them. Every politician I wouldn't want to trust with a 10-foot pole, trust them with my money, my life, my kids, which I don't have kids. I don't want to trust them with anything. I don't interact with politicians. I don't trust them. I hate politicians. But, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I need to be close to know what they're doing to be able to not be corrupted because of the corruption that's going on there. Then there are the looters, the people that are taking advantage of the situation, the opportunists, whether it's the people that could be, it could be like something where you might have Black Lives Matter with people infiltrating in there to create a ruckus, to create the riots, to escalate this into something that could have been peaceful into something that's now chaotic and will be leaving ramifications for a long time, many consequences for that entire community. I mean, remember, you're going to see where we've had times where certain cities don't recover well from this. And you might not think it happens, but it's very much true. So when you have all this happening, there's got to be something. Some people have to respond to what's going on here and realize this cannot be happening. We cannot allow this kind of thing to happen. But this is also leadership. There is no leadership going on right now. And then the people that are supposed to be reporting what's going on the ground, they are worse for everything else because the media is not helping. They are amplifying. As long as the cameras are out there, as long as the reporters are out there with their microphones reporting on the rioting, the looting, because that's what's going to get the eyeballs on the screen and the ratings for them for at least a day or two and get advertisers drawn in, for attention bait, clickbait, that's what they're going to do. Not only that, social media in the same sense is also reprehensible. They're also accountable for what's going on here. This is what's called the platform press, the social media platform press complex. This right here, this has been culminating for years. The digital disruption that I talk about on this program on a regular basis. There is one thing to be said about how it has affected all different areas. And this is one thing I talk about most part. In the Broadcasters Podcast, I talk mostly about the fact that we have all these different media platforms, all these media entities, music, movies, TV, and radio, which is what I cover. The digital disruption that causes the change from the establishment to a new evolving platform, to a new evolving era of media. The news directly affected all the time. And we talk about the culture, the social culture, the corporate culture, the political correctness, all the other underlying effects that affect creativity for the most part. But we also have to also talk about how it's affecting the people, the public, and how it's not being done for that. I don't get onto this platform that much to talk about that side and be an advocate in that sense for what's being presented to the audience, because they should be able to go and see what they want. They are. Okay? But my point is, you can't get away from the fact you're going to see the looting, the fires, all the breaking out. Yeah, that's going to be out there. I understand that. But what I don't see is more information about the case. Now, it is basically open and shut case. I mean, my whole thing is it's an open and shut case. We have the evidence. Now, what also has to be said is the investigation as to why the other officers did not react and how they handled the situation. Because more importantly, we want to know what happened right before this happened. What led to this? What happened with this particular suspect? What he was doing, supposedly forging documents. Why the pulling over, why the traffic stop was done at that point. How they handled the situation when they had onlookers, the neighborhood they were in, where people were definitely looking on, and they're seeing black victim being arrested and all white cops. So that's just going to just agitate because of the media narrative that's out there that's been created. Now, part of that is justified. Part of that has been amplified and escalated by the platform press complex. And because of the fact that social media gets to comment on what's going on here. Yes, there are some people. Yes, if you're going to say that it is a racially motivated thing, I understand that. I accept that argument. In this case, I could see it. But I can't say this is an ongoing narrative that goes across the board. This kind of case helps to amplify that narrative. But this is not an everyday thing. We don't see this every single day of every single city and every single state. We don't see that. If it is, remember, if it's attention bait and clickbait, then you'd have these stories being put on every TV station around the country. But it's not. It's not as common. It is not as rampant, and it's not as it's just there are certain cases that will be pointed out. It's the same way when we see a case of a kidnapping, we see a young woman being kidnapped. If it's a pretty young woman, they will cover that, and they'll be all over it like white on rice. We know that. The media narrative is so simple. I mean, again, when you see the O.J. Simpson case, it really goes back to that. The O.J. Simpson case was an example that really showed more than anything else. It's funny where I was watching Narcos, the third season of Narcos. They talk about the fact of, you know what? When the O.J. Simpson story came across, reality TV really started there. We all know that. O.J. Simpson's trial started all of this because we never got so much into the weeds of all the stories that were going on. Even when we had Tawana Brawley and Al Sharpton, that was more of a regional issue. It didn't get to the effect of where we got to now. I mean, the National Enquirer could talk about that. We had other news sources that would talk about it, but we never had that national news source that really amplified. Because really, we started getting the tabloid stuff going on into the 90s, right? The talk shows, the hard copies, current affairs, inside editions, all those tabloid shows started coming across. We always had tabloids. But when they started getting themselves into the crime thing and they saw O.J. Simpson, changed. When the soap operas were being shut off. First of all, soap operas went away and starting to erode right then and there. When people started getting more interest in the O.J. Simpson trial, watching it every damn day on TV, made the difference. And only a few years later do you have the internet and the communications, the access to information, which is really what's the biggest problem. We have so much access to information, and I love the fact we have all this access to information. That is wonderful. But man, there's got to be, it's the arbiters, the people that have to be arbiters of truth. We're hearing that phrase from Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and others about social media, which is also part of this whole story. We're seeing all that. Arbiters of truth. We don't need truth police. We want fact finders. We want aggregators. We want people to find the stories and report on it. I do not want my news sources to be reporting on fucking Twitter feeds, Periscope feeds, TikTok responses. Okay? You can see the fabric of America on TikTok. I kid you not. I've only gotten on there about a month ago. And I mean, it was all fun. Oh, look at the young girls dancing or seeing food recipes and things being done or pranks. And it took 2 days. Just yesterday, I started seeing Minneapolis, racism. Everybody's got an opinion. So all of a sudden, the fabric of America, the pulse of America is on TikTok. I kid you not. All different shapes and sizes, all different races, creeds, cultures. It's a full formula, a whole dichotomy of people that are on there that are making comments. And one thing I can tell you more than anything else, seeing police officers, and of course, there's a lot of first responders on TikTok, you believe it or not. A lot of cops I saw back to back commenting on this. And they're in the same opinion I am. They all know in basic defense training, what George Floyd was subjected to shouldn't have happened. That is not how they were trained. Now, I can understand putting a knee on somebody's back and somebody else helping to put somebody else's knee, like putting, your knees down or trying to subdue a subject on the floor where somebody's on their knees, putting their knees down on their other person's legs, holding them down for enough time for them to put handcuffs or put a zip tie on them and get them the fuck up and into the fucking car. But it didn't do that. And all these cops that I saw on TikTok, a full different fabric, right? Different creeds, cultures, races, all that. All these different cops commenting, and they're absolutely right. It looks bad on them. And most importantly, this is a story that's being focused in Minneapolis. But again, what you see on television, what you see on social media, and whatever you see your news, when you see all of this, you're going to mirror this where other societies are going to feel like this is the way it is in their own neighborhood. Do you understand that? So what you see in Minneapolis, some people are going to misconstrue what's going on here, and it's going to be brought around, and other cities are going to feel the same damn way. Okay, we've already had big city riots in many other cities that have been affected, okay? Miami had it in the 80s. Detroit had it in the 60s, right? We've seen all of this. LA had it in the 70s and the 90s. All right? We've seen all that. No surprise there. And all I'm saying is, we know in the story what everybody else knows is that the cops in question, the cops that were on the scene, it's their fault. They are to blame. Then the blame goes down the line. It goes down the chain of command. It goes to the police chief. It goes to the mayor. It goes to the Congress people that represent that district. It goes to any of those people that are civic leaders that were involved in this story. It's on them. All the blame is on them. They have to own it. And you know who has to own it too? The media. Journalism as a whole. Axios tells it in a great way. Okay? Last week, before the George Floyd story became a thing, Axios put a story out saying media cuts weigh on industry morale. Okay. And there was a couple things they say about the story where there are all the layoffs that were going on. We talked about last week and the week before. We talked about Vice, Quartz, Economist, Condé Nast, BuzzFeed, and so many others. If I didn't say it here, I said it on the When I'm Not Podcasting series, which is on YouTube and whatever. And you can find a link for it over at broadcasterspodcast.com. But one of the things I want to point out in this story is this. So we know that the pandemic, in the big picture, thousands of other jobs in the news media industry have been lost at the local and global levels. Student internships and fellowships have been mostly canceled, hindering younger journalists from experience and exposure within the industry. But then the other thing is the thought bubble. Now, this is the other thing I think was very well said in this Axios story. The digital era blew up the old business model of the news industry, and it has spent 25 years searching for a new one. Correct. But instead of finding a lasting solution, the industry took a long ride on a pendulum swinging between ad revenue and subscriptions income. It bet heavily on the first during flush times and rushed wildly to the second when recessions hit. Because the industry, now entering the third or fourth round of this cycle, doesn't seem able to change its behavior, that pendulum now feels like a wrecking ball. You hear the phrase journalism is dead. Well, they're absolutely right about that. There's no doubt about it. I want to break that all down to you tonight because it needs to be said. I don't hear anybody crawling out the media about what they're doing here and how stories like this and the influence, the collusion, the lobbying and the relationships they have with social media and other entities and politics on both sides. All these other underlying factors are damaging and destroying journalism as a whole. And that is the platform press complex. We have to talk all about that because then on top of that, the media that we get on a regular basis, then you have the media side that is the social media side. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Those are the 5 I would really focus on. Because you have the supposed journalism experts, and I am putting finger quotes up, being the professionals, the experts on this, talking about what's going on and giving their opinion and editorial on it and editorializing on it. And then there's the people that will do that as well. But remember, you can only have a good opinion if you have an informed opinion. And some people don't get the right information because the information they're getting is misleading them. And it's not always accurate. And it's not always accurate. It's also causing a narrative. It is a bias. And this goes across the board. We don't need opinions. We just need to see the stories and let the people think for themselves and let them determine what the story is. Let them debate and discourse with everyone else so they understand the story. They can talk about it. We can talk things out. We can be diplomatic and ambassadorial about these issues instead of going to where we are here. How many more times do we need to see Baltimore, Ferguson, Milwaukee, and Minneapolis? How many more times do we need cities like this? How many more times do we need stories like this? We are trying to get out of a fucking pandemic right now. We're trying to get the city, all the cities in the country, in the states in this country back to work, back to reopening again. And this right here has basically, the media has decided not to go ahead and create doom and gloom like they've been doing this whole time. Panic porn, as it's being called. They decided to go to this. This is even as good because we know, the media already knows, the panic porn is getting all these people exhausted. Here's a nice, fat, juicy, racist story they can call about. They're going to point it like that because they know what sells, what bleeds. When it bleeds, it leads. That's what local news does. But in this right here, if you can shock and awe and create outrage and anger, that sells. That's ratings, baby. Nice and meaty and juicy. sop it all up with a biscuit. Let's continue. All right. The Columbia Journalism Review put out an interesting story last year, 2019, and I think this is a very well mentioned story. And by the way, I really tried my best to make sure I could get stories here that were objective, down the middle, that would just actually was doing the job that I want of them to do, is actually report the facts. Not actually a story. They actually reported opinion, but their opinion was fact. But I want who, what, when, or why. That story actually told me why the media is in the issues that they're in, why there's so many layoffs right now, why they're hurting excessively, and why they are so distrusted, which we'll also talk about that as well. But here we go. The rise and fall of media trust. There are worse things than being widely disliked. Now, in this story, let's go ahead and talk about it. Is too much made of the mistrust of journalists? Is the alarm of our moment, and one that gets the sense that the pitch of anti-press sentiment is now the most fevered it's been since the founding of the Republic. In fact, presidents from George Washington on, including Thomas Jefferson, judged newspapers to be full of lies. Editors didn't have much regard for their own kind, sometimes challenging one another to duels. There's a history of popular violence against the media, notably against abolitionist newspapers before the Civil War and against black journalists and institutions at various points thereafter, a matter not of distrust, but of hate and fear. Now, they move along and talk about the whole story about everything going on when it comes to the history of the media. I'm putting this in the description, so if you want to go ahead and check it out for yourself, please do. But I'm going to go ahead and go down into where we are right now. One quote that's been put in this article is, quote, "It may be time for journalists to acknowledge that they write from a set of values, not simply from a disinterested effort at truth. This will not be easy." The problem here, and this is what I like about this Columbia Journalism Review. Listen to what they're saying right here. The problem here, okay, engendering such distrust in the media, 40% of Americans seem to accept that, and even in the face of incontrovertible reporting to the contrary, there's a kind of thumb of the eye of the so-called coastal elites. Has a healthy skepticism become a civically disabling cynicism? Now, they were talking about that when it comes to, when President Trump actually talks to his political base, right? But here's one thing they mentioned that was more than that. The problem transcends the Trump presidency. The old days of ritually objective news reporting, he said, she said, are not gone, but have been reduced in importance from the 1970s on, as mainstream outlets, having increasingly emphasized analysis and news coverage, not quite so much who, what, when, where, as, why. I'm going to repeat that again, because that is the pinnacle of everything I talk about on this program when it comes to journalism. Columbia Journalism Review says this absolutely correct. The old days of ritually objective news reporting. That is the way news reporting is supposed to be. Then if you want to have opinion editorial, first of all, you leave it to people that want to write that. You're entitled to write whatever you want to say. You have free speech rights to it, okay? You got a First Amendment option to go ahead and do that. You are allowed to do that. And I will fight for the right for you to say it. As it's been said, was a Voltaire phrase, right? The philosopher Voltaire in the Age of Enlightenment. I might not like what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Again, now they're saying the old days of ritually objective news reporting are not gone. They are. In essence, they are. Who's doing that right now? Who is in the business of just doing, here are the facts, and not just the facts, we're trying to be like facts, truth over facts. No. Don't do that. No. Tell the story and let people learn what you found from the evidence. It's just like a court case. Opening statement is a standalone editorial. But the evidence is what you weigh your opinion on, is what you weigh, the jury weighs on the court of public opinion. That's what we're doing here. So again, they've been reduced in importance. It's been reduced to almost nothing now. Having increasingly emphasized analysis and news coverage, not quite so much who, what, when, where, as, why. There has been a profound cultural shift in journalism during this period. The limitations of straitjacketed objectivity came to be understood, and journalism began to embrace the necessity of interpretation, as both quantitative studies and journalists' recollections attest. Now, I also talk about there has been investigative journalism and other forms of enterprise reporting in the last 3 decades. Yes. In the face of severe economic problems afflicting daily newspapers, leading metro dailies have continued whenever possible to pursue aggressive analytical journalism. And there is out there. I do not deny that. I read it and I appreciate it. Very hard times to keep that up. This places great responsibility on readers to discern for themselves the difference between what can be trusted as factual and what represents the reporter's judgment. A judgment that, however conscientious, goes beyond documented facts. That's gospel right there. Where are we seeing that today? Are we seeing that today? I leave that question up to you to say, I don't see it. And I'm very cynical. News organizations should have to explain to themselves to communicate the difference between the news department and the editorial page. More than a quarter. I mean, this article is such gold. I'm going to put this up. I'm every time I got to go ahead and quote journalism, I'm going to put this fucking article right here. Fall and Rise of Fall Media Trust. This Columbia Journalism Report. This thing is amazing. I will go ahead and cite this forever. It's so well read. News organizations should have to explain to themselves to communicate the difference between the news department and the editorial page. More than a quarter of Americans do not understand the distinction. To show how they gather the news, to clarify why they sometimes cannot divulge their sources, which they should have sources. Okay? Now, if you want to hold your journalistic shield up until the point that you have to go to court and then you have to go and give it, if you need to give it in front of a grand jury that is sealed, then do it. You should be able to go ahead and have sources you can identify in a court of law. You might not have to go and repeat those sources to the world and to the public to protect those sources. Fine. But if you're not able to go ahead and divulge those sources in open court, it's in court, in a sealed courtroom, in front of a judge, or in front of law enforcement, there's something wrong. No, you don't want to do it in front of cops. Okay. You want to do it in front of the courtroom? And want to go ahead and take the arrest, go to jail for it, see a judge, and report to him? Okay. I respect that. Many journalists have done that, and they're brave. And I'll give them that. How many journalists do we know that are that brave to hold their sources and to pull their story for risk of what will happen to them? Who do we have out there that's doing that? There are some. How many of the media establishment putting their necks on the line to get the story? Good question. To explain why it matters that nearly all scientific authorities believe that the most important element in global warming is what humans contribute to it. Okay? It also may be time to acknowledge that they write from a set of values, not from simply a disinterested effort at truth. This will not be easy, since journalists have spent decades denying that their personal values have anything to do with their news reporting, and that's the point. It does. Their opinions, their feelings are getting injected into this. Absolutely. Back into this story. Just as doctors take seriously the Hippocratic Oath, journalists and the mainstream media almost all feel strongly that 1, they should seek truth. 2, they should hold government publicly accountable. And 3, government officials, elected and appointed, are public servants and should not be in government to line their own pockets. My guess is those values would resonate with readers if only they were articulated. Yep. I love it. What a well-written couple of paragraphs right there in that story. It's the crux of everything I talk about. be it Columbia University, to give gold like that about the state of journalism. And they're absolutely right. Because that is what I want students that are coming up to become journalism majors. I want them to learn that right there. I want them to learn that. And if they're going to work in the school newspaper, I hope they understand there are values they might have. And it's not as if you can't have your own opinion. I'm not saying that. But when you're reporting the news, you report the news. Who, what, when, where, and why. He said, she said. Absolutely correct. Eyewitness accounts. Proper sources. If you have to protect them all the way to the courtroom, then you do that. But you have proper sources. Okay, that's all there is to it. It's got to be done. No anonymous sources. And if they're going to be anonymous, they're only anonymous because you're not trying to divulge. They're unnamed. We don't want anonymous sources. You want to have unnamed sources? They're not willing to go on the record? Okay. But if you got to go to a court of law and explain yourself, you're going to have to be able to go ahead and show yourself that as valid. And you're going to have to go ahead and confront that issue. And you're going to have to be able to go and say something. If you don't, there's a problem. And you are putting a lot of distrust in the public. The public is smarter than that. You need to go and give a lot more credence and believe that the public that listen and watch and read your content are much smarter than you claim them out to be. They are not the lowest common denominator. People can think for themselves. Now, there's more that they say to the story, and it's just so much that's being said in the special report that I could talk about, but I want to just leave that right there. But again, Michael Schudson, sociologist, historian of the news media, I should get this guy on this damn show. What a great story here. I'm going to try to talk to him. I'm going to try to see if I can get him on the show here and talk about this, because this is incredible. I love what he said right here. This is fantastic. And this tells my point. Now, more that goes on here is about the fact that the bad news is quietly being buried during the pandemic. With the world's attention glued to it, news about anything else has been slipping farther and farther down the proverbial front page. But that doesn't mean nothing's been going on. Whether by design or coincidence, politicians and others are taking cover under the news to move forward on their plans. And with so much to say about the pandemic, journalists have been letting slide what might otherwise land above the fold. Absolutely correct. And they tell you so much is going on right now that nobody knows. They're listing so much here. And this is a story that just came out today. Zoa Beery wrote this. And here's some of the stories they bring up. Okay. The EPA rolling back Obama administration's hard-won fuel efficiency standards. Airlines lobbying international regulators for release for carbon offsetting obligations. The Justice Department dropping a case brought by a special counsel Robert Mueller against two Russian companies that worked to influence the 2016 presidential election. And more. And then also keeping the Trump administration accountable with longstanding priorities. Tightening access to food stamps. Work requirement rules that would revoke benefits for up to 1.3 million people on hold during the state of emergency declaration. A recent preliminary injunction against the rule that once President Trump lifts the Stafford Act. Another new rule requiring separate food stamps application for people already receiving other benefits is set to impact up to 3.1 million eligible Americans. Why can't we talk about these stories? They're valid. They're very valid. How about Congress weighing the Earn It Act, a privacy curtailing bill that would experts predict would ban end-to-end encryption, using secure messaging apps like Signal and WhatsApp, hold online platforms responsible for content posted by users, and give law enforcement a long-sought backdoor into other messaging services like iMessage. Wow. Look at all this shit going on. I mean, again, there's so much that can be said. There's so much other news that's going on that nobody gets informed about. You know how hard it is? You have to go and dig that on a regular basis. But no, we have to talk about Minnesota. And by the way, that goes into my next story. Okay? Social media. And what's being done with that and how people are trying to handle this here. Same way, right? Social media is another beast. When you talk about Google, Twitter, Facebook, really those three entities say more than anything else. I mean, I'm looking right now on TV and I still see all the riots going on and just this unrest. What's going on in Minneapolis? It's God, man, it's so annoying. Social media and social control. There's a story from Monthly Review online that talks about this. And they mentioned that how Silicon Valley serves the U.S. State Department. Now, this is... they mentioned that Google, Twitter, Microsoft, along with Facebook and others, are deeply wedded into the U.S. security state and the billionaires it upholds. Walter Lippmann had a groundbreaking study in 1922 of the news media, Public Opinion. It was a chapter that was titled, quote, "The World Outside and the Pictures in Our Heads." He presents the media as a bottleneck through which information about the world beyond the perception of our senses must pass. Aside from the question of which stories get past through that bottleneck, which information about an event that survives the crucible of condensation into an article, news bulletin, or a wire is determined by the biases of the writer and editor. In turn, control over that information bottleneck gives the controller incredible power to shape the consciousness of readers about the world outside the manufacture of consent. And that's what I wanted to take from that article, because that says everything as well. The way public opinion is perceived by what we're getting from the media. Articles, news bulletins, wires, news packages on television, radio stories, all that. Determined by the biases of the writer and editor. So again, where's the objectivity now? Because there are obvious, clear, seen bias and noticed biases, apparent biases by the editors and the writers and the people that are presenting the content, writing the content, and editorializing and leading the publishing of that content. It's all there. Now, the dearth of information about the world was made available by the internet seems to remove the bottleneck upon which Lippmann fretted, and indeed, a generation of tech evangelists tried to present it in such a manner. But the truth is, it only further obscured both the bottlenecks and crucibles that distill information for our consumption. The media giants that control our access to information, from search engines like Google to social media like Facebook, have turned themselves into portals into the world, and present themselves as impartial to that role. Present themselves as impartial. However, behind a facade of separateness, strong connecting links bind to tech giants of the oligarchy and the security state on which they rely, given the interests of the elite determinative influence over which information we access. And this story actually exposes more of the ways that the shady web of influence and oversight operates. I'm going to put that story up there as well. This says everything right now. I mean, Walter Lippmann had it in 1922. Amazing. Misleading media, we've had that it's just the beginning of the constitutional republic, the United States of America. We've had it for a long time. And I'm sure before that as well. So you're looking at all this and you're saying to yourself, well, how bad is it with Silicon Valley? Well, the thing is, at the behest of the oligarchy and the security state that they talked about, along with the relationships they have constructed and have formulated and have fostered with the media companies, which is another oligarchy, the media oligarchy itself, the establishment media. Together, they have combined their forces into the platform press. The Resource Center on Media Freedom in Europe put a story out in March 2017. Actually, this is from the Tao Center for Digital Journalism. And this story was called The Platform Press, How Silicon Valley Re-Engineered Journalism. So in this story, they report the advent of social media platforms and technology companies led to a rapid takeover of traditional publishers' roles by companies including Facebook, Snapchat, Google, and Twitter, which have evolved beyond their role as distribution channels and now control what audiences see and who gets paid for their attention. It's all about a paying business. and even what format and type of journalism flourishes. On the other hand, news companies have given more of their traditional functions, and publishing is no longer the core activity of certain journalism organizations. The Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia Journalism School, by the way, they talk about this. In the span of 20 years, journalism has experienced 3 significant changes in the business and distribution models. The switch from analog to digital, the rise of the social web, and now the dominance of mobile. The last phase has seen large technology companies dominate the markets for attention and advertising, and has forced news organizations to rethink their processes and structures. Again, so well said. Through content analysis and interviews, the report highlights how technology platforms have become publishers in a short space of time, leaving news organizations confused about their future. How competition among platforms to release products for publishers is helping newsrooms reach larger audiences than ever before, but with significant concerns about loss of branding, lack of audience, data, and migration of advertising revenue. How social platforms shape its journalism itself by offering incentives to news organizations for particular types of content, such as live video, or by dictating publisher activity through design standards. So again, this whole thing tells everything about it. And I'm going to have to go into the Tao Center of Columbia Journalism after a while. I'm going to have to go and get into what they've been talking about, because there's more to be said about this subject. But again, this is where I'm coming from with all this. Now, why do I bring up the whole issue with social media and how it's being re-engineering journalism? Well, we already see social re-engineering in a lot of different senses. Again, it's manipulating. When things are not objective, when there are biases along the board, then things like this are going to happen. So here's the one that we have now. Section 230. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Let me explain what that is to everyone out there so that you're not aware. Short and sweet, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, they cite it here as, quote, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. There we go. Now, only a few months ago, the Justice Department was actually hosting a workshop to examine the scope of the law known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Again, like I said, the law protects online platforms from liability for their users' posts and allows them to moderate users' content without being treated as publishers. As tech companies have grown in size and power, Congress has also questioned whether Section 230 needs an update. Okay. Now, Justice Department was using a form of academics, nonprofit leaders, and industry advocates back in February to discuss the future of a law that has shielded tech companies from legal liability for their users' posts since its enactment in 1996. So it has come to symbolize this Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, the exceptional treatment from the government that has fueled the growth of a number of small players. For tech companies, the law represents the Internet's founding of values of openness and free expression, while also allowing them to remove the most insidious speech without stumbling into a legal minefield. Now, Section 230 was introduced by Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, and former Republican Congressman Chris Cox from California, as a way of protecting tech companies from becoming legally liable for their users' content if they opted to moderate it. The law followed a court ruling against the online platform Prodigy back in 1996. An investment firm sued Prodigy after one of the platform's anonymous users accused it of fraud. Prodigy accused it wasn't responsible for its user speech, but the court found that because the platform moderated some of its users' posts, it should be treated more like a publisher, which can be held legally liable for misleading or harmful content it publishes. The ruling galvanized Cox and Wyden to what introduced becomes Section 230. It was allowing companies to engage in a Good Samaritan moderation of objectionable material without being treated like a publisher or speaker under the law. And that is why platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Google's YouTube can take down terrorist content or harassing messages while still enjoying other legal protections. It's also been essential for these companies to achieve massive scale. If they were liable for everything users posted, they'd either have to vet every piece of content before it went live, which would dramatically increase expenses or create delays, or give up all moderation, which will make for a worse user experience. Well, we tried it this way for 25 years almost. The idea of having Section 230 in play, well, we see it's being abused. We see the media is taking their mark along it. And they're basically, they are kind of taking the side of social media, and social media is placating and capitulating to the mainstream establishment. Therefore, the platform press. That's what we got. Again, influence of social media platforms. They're being influenced, technology companies being influenced, and American journalism highlighting the clashes between trade-offs between growth, autonomy, and quality for the profession worldwide. Again, Silicon Valley re-engineering journalism as a result of this law being allowed. That's the point. From Forbes, that's going to report on this story. An op-ed that says, what is Section 230 and why does Trump want to change it? So again, I just want something objective that explains this without being told why it's this way or that way and why the president wants to do it. I don't care, okay? There's a bigger story. This was way before President Trump. This could have been handled by Clinton. It could have been held by President Obama. It could have been handled by President Bush. I had to go in and confront this story. Okay, it was under President Clinton that allowed this, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and other things that got into play. The deregulation. All this created so much. And the objectivity that I talked about in the original story from Columbia Journalism Review says it all. Re-engineered, the way journalism used to be for over 25 years has changed. And now it's more apparent than ever. And it's so true. So I read Section 230 to you. 26 words long, short and to the point. But it has an outsized effect on life as we know it. Jeff Costa, the cybersecurity law professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, one of the most foremost experts on Section 230, said they are, quote, the 26 words that created the internet. Most fundamentally, Section 230, end quote, provides immunity to social media companies like Facebook and Twitter against being sued over the content on their site. This allows them to operate and flourish without needing to moderate content. Costa says, quote, Section 230 set the legal framework for the internet that we know today that relies heavily on user content rather than content that companies create. Without Section 230, companies would not be willing to take so many risks. President Trump now wants to change that. He has signed a new executive order on Thursday, as I record tonight, that will try to curb how social media sites use the legislation to prevent legal action. Now, as I read this executive order, the idea is not to regulate the social media companies. It is to remove the shield for if content is going to be moderated and resources are being put by Twitter and Facebook to fact check any particular comments, tweets, Facebook posts, YouTube channels, YouTube videos. In that matter, there are things that are being put underneath other resources that in many ways it looks like it contradicts or it's being used to fact check what's the story being told. But then what we're realizing is the fact checking is also being said to be it's not showing anything about the fact that the fact checkers are not being fact checked. So what does this mean in practice, it says? Well, here's what Forbes says. Quote, it offers a broad shield to tech companies, protecting them from lawsuits over content generated by users on their sites. Again, giving Facebook and Twitter the right to moderate content, but does not give them the right the responsibility to do so. Because content is posted on their platform so rapidly, there is just no way they can possibly police everything. That's according to Senator Wyden, who was one of the drafters of Section 230. Tech companies are not absolved from everything. They're still required to police some type of unlawful content, such as child pornography or bootleg movies. And quite a number of things when it comes to worldwide. The backstory is very interesting as well. So in the 1990s, Stratton Oakmont, the brokerage founded by Jordan Belfort, yes, the Wolf of Wall Street guy, sued Prodigy for defamation. Someone on a Prodigy-run message board accused Stratton Oakmont of fraud. New York State Supreme Court ruled that Prodigy had acted as a publisher and thus was liable for defamation. Goodbye, Prodigy. And then the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision, struck down the most of the act of the Communications Decency Act, but Section 230 was kept in. Now, is Section 230 only relevant for social media sites? They say no. It's impossible to overstate how wide the legislation's reach is. Twitter and Facebook rely on it. So does Google, for instance. Without it, the search engine company might be sued for what it displays in search results. Yelp and Amazon see it as a fundamental underpinning to allow reviews. My point is, if you're already doing fact-checking, you're trying to regulate, you are acting as a publisher. No doubt about it. YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter are doing that more than ever. And for whatever reason they're doing that, if they're going to do that, regardless of what your political slant might be, if you're going to let that affect and take away your objectivity, then don't listen to me, okay? You're going to think I'm full of shit. But the truth is, if they're going to act as publishers, then that Section 230 shield needs to be dropped. They need to be held accountable. We don't want them regulated. But you know what? You need to worry about the fact that if somebody puts something out there, you just do what you have to as a public square. The stories get out there. Okay? Get your lawyers ready if that's what's necessary. If you are trying to be arbiters of truth, which is what Mark Zuckerberg said, I didn't say it. He started saying it. Jack Dorsey the same way. If you're going to start doing that, then Section 230 goes away. If you're going to allow free speech to go, because yes, you might not be an American company, but you are broadcasting to the world. You're servicing a global audience. Yes, that's correct. So you might not feel behooven to adhere to the First Amendment in so much of a case. But you're American companies and you operate in the U.S. So as far as we're concerned, yes, you do have to adhere to the laws of the United States. And if an executive order and eventual legislation, which has bipartisan support, as we said, there's bipartisan support. They were already discussing this. That we were going to have to get to a point, but now, because, the president was directly affected by this on 2 of his tweets, regardless of political issues, Twitter decided to go ahead and start fact-checking the President of the United States. You know what? Regardless of what you think, he reacted quickly. It's just the way he is, right? He's a reactionary. We can all agree with that. So he reacted. When it directly affects him, yeah, it's selfish, but who gives a shit? That's what it is. This was already being handled 3 months ago. This was going to come down the line eventually. That's why I cited that story from CNBC. Because the Justice Department was already doing oversight on this already. This was already going to become an issue. We would have had to wait till after the pandemic, but the president decided to go ahead and, you know what? I'm going to put it on right now. Executive order. Bam. And he did it. Now let's talk about the change. So it's mostly Republican politicians, including President Trump, Marco Rubio and Josh Hawley, notably, that believe that social media sites like Twitter are unfairly biased against conservative speech. Twitter earlier this week appended fact-check warnings to several of the president's tweets that sought to discredit mail-in ballots. Angering Trump, he quickly vowed to apply greater regulation to social media sites. But what I read of the executive order is not necessarily regulation. It's eliminating Section 230, eliminating that shield. So there's really not regulation. It's taking the shield out. Okay. While Trump and conservatives are the loudest critics, some liberal detractors are as well. Senator Ron Wyden, I'm quoting again, has had some harsh words for tech companies. He envisions Section 230 as not only offering such businesses a shield, but to also giving them a sword to actively curtail bad content on their sites. He's been disappointed with tech's lack of interest in monitoring itself, warning that if you don't use the sword, there are going to be people coming for your shield. That's what needs to happen. I don't need regulation. I don't want Internet Bill of Rights. As I learned all this now, I thought, I would want to weigh what Internet Bill of Rights would be, but we don't need that. We just need all these companies to be accountable. If they're going to be like the media, then they can also not have the shield like the media. Because you know what? The media companies, if they misrepresent a story and they can go attack, then you know what they do? They will go ahead and get sued upon. Ask CNN, ask MSNBC. Ask the New York Times, Washington Post, the National Enquirer. Ask them all. They've all gotten hit with lawsuits. Now, this story, when they brought this up, this did not give what the executive order was. But I want to go ahead and get into what the executive order actually entails. So in Section 1 under policy, in this executive order, it says, as a nation, we must foster and protect diverse viewpoints in today's digital communications environment where all Americans can and should have a voice. We must seek transparency and accountability from all online platforms and encourage standards and tools to protect and preserve the integrity and the openness of American discourse and freedom of expression. Section 2 is protections against online censorship. So it will be to foster clear ground rules promoting free and open debate on the internet. Promoting among the ground rules governing the debate is immunity, the immunity from liability created by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. The scope of that immunity should be clarified. It should not extend beyond its text and purpose to provide protection for those who purport to provide users a forum for free and open speech, but in reality use their power over a vital means of communication to engage in deceptive or pretextual actions, stifling free and open debate by censoring certain viewpoints. More into the story, Section 230 was not intended to allow a handful of companies to grow into titans, controlling vital avenues of our national discourse under the guise of promoting open forums for debate and then to provide those behemoths blanket immunity when they use their power to censor content and silence viewpoints they dislike. When an interactive computer service provider removes or restricts access to content and its actions do not meet the criteria, it is engaged in editorial conduct. That's what they're saying. So they're going to ask that such a provider should properly lose the limited liability shield and be exposed to liability like any other traditional editor and publisher that is not an online provider. That's what I want. That's all I want right there. The tech companies just need to realize, you know what? Go back to what you were doing before you did to this point. You need to go ahead and go backwards on what you were doing before censorship came into play, before editorializing content of other people's opinions, whatever those things might be, whatever non-objective, subjective they might have been. That's not upon Twitter or Facebook or YouTube to be the arbiters of truth. They're not supposed to be. I don't want them regulated. I want them, if they're going to do what they're going to do, they need to be held liable. Okay, if that means they're going to have lawsuits, they better have legal divisions ready to go. And they all do. They all have pretty extensive legal divisions because Google's always in antitrust lawsuits. Twitter and Facebook have had to deal with their own things as well. I'm sure they're going to have to deal with it. Section 3 is protecting federal taxpayer dollars from financing online platforms that restrict free speech. So again, that means the government is going to be curbing the amount of money that's being spent with those outlets. So it's denying them ad dollars. They're being punished. Yeah. So with all that, this is where we are now. When it comes to the news, they're going to have to be held accountable, and people that are going to be able to go out there and have to go ahead and go after, the stories that are out there. Here's the thing. Concluding my subject tonight, there's nothing that can be done to curb how things are going on with the platform press. Okay, the way mainstream media, the media establishment is right now, you can't change it. Okay, however you feel about CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, Miami Herald, LA Times, whatever. You can't change them. And trust me, there are stories I can find where I find credible, objective stories that are being well told. Wall Street Journal, same thing. That's fine. And there are going to be outlets that are left-leaning, right-leaning, libertarian, whatever. But most importantly, we need to be able to open, and this is social media is the opening for grassroots organizations, for citizen journalists, for investigative journalists to get their word out there. They should be allowed to use social media just like everybody else as a public square to have their stories be told. And it's up to the reader, the consumer, to follow, debate, discourse, discern what they're reading, dissect what they're reading, and take it to what the context is. Find the context easily and learn about it. And as for journalism in general, I really mean this from the bottom of my heart. For all the mainstream media out there, you're not going to do this. If you want to build trust once again, that Columbia Journalism Review right there, that professor, talking about how we had objective news reporting paralleled with editorial, yeah, let's go back to that. Let's get back to that. I mean, can I just do this? If all these outlets on television, if they want to just be editorial, then be that. But don't act like you're news organizations when you're not. Really, don't do it. Please, call yourself editorial, call yourself opinionated. I would rather you just say that. Be honest with us. Because if you think that's how you're going to make money, then please just don't lie to us. Or don't hide the fact that you're doing it. Just say that you are. Go ahead. I'll be fine with that. I would feel much better if you did. I'm going to leave right there. And I hope people understand where I'm coming from. I mean, this was really, much like I've done stories about radio, this story right here, I feel so good right now after getting all this out. Because this story, I want more people to talk about it. And I hope all of you listening, however you listen to this, if you're just catching this story for the first time, if you catch it on YouTube or you catch it on a feed in your podcast, or you just happen to find it in a Google search, I hope you will go ahead and spread this word around. This is a discussion I want out there for everyone. This is what I want for everybody to go and talk about. I want this more than anything else. Because I want journalism back. I want everybody to have the ability to go ahead and read and learn for themselves. And everybody just be open about who they are. If you're a media outlet and you want to say that you are right-wing, left-wing, you want to, if your opinions or editorials, you just want to be that, then just be that. Because if you want to be opinion editorial, then go right ahead. People can read all you want. But let them know so they can also say, you know what? Okay, I'll give... Because then you'll have people that will want to go ahead and hear differing, consenting opinions. And that's good. Because we all should encourage people to go and see both sides of the story. Or all sides of the story for that matter. I'd rather have that. But we're not. And all I can do here with this little program of mine, which isn't the biggest audience in the world, but I know a few people listen to you. And if you do, I am so thankful that you do. I really appreciate it. I hope all of you will just consider listening to me, hearing me out of what I'm saying, and spread the word. If you want to hear more about stories like this here on the Broadcasters Podcast, then please hit me up. Hey, if you want to talk to me, Facebook page is at King of Podcasts. My Twitter is at King of Podcasts. The email is kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. If you want to comment, you can also comment on the actual show itself at broadcasterspodcast.com. I don't shut down comments. I encourage it. Please do. Please do speak your mind. I want to hear if I'm right or wrong. I want to know what you think about it. I'd love to hear from you. So more than anything else, I hope you have a wonderful week. again, I'll be doing some content when I'm not podcasting on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/JBRASCO951. If you'd like to help me out, I welcome you to go ahead and check out my Amazon link. Special Amazon link for all of you out there. It's at kingofamazon.com, kingofamazon.com. And I hope we can get past, a lot of different things right now. Section 230 is going to be implemented. Let's see what happens. I want to keep an eye on this. We'll definitely come back to the story once we see what Twitter and Facebook do to react, or what YouTube does to react, and Google does as well. I want to see what's going to happen there, because this is going to be we got to follow the story and see what happens from it. And till next week, remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by BroadcastersPodcast.com and KingofPodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. KingofPodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program. The Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at KingofPodcasts.com.